What's up, family? Welcome back to the Stop Sinking Show, where we go from struggle to flow. This is an appropriate conversation for Men's Mental Health Month. I love you all, my brothers. My entire life, I have been made to feel guilty about my anger. And some of it is valid. I check myself if my anger is out of place all the time. Any situation should be challenged with minimal required force, always. You only look crazy when you tackle the thing in front of you with way more force than is required. Anger is an issue when it is overbearing in comparison to the situation at hand. But the problem becomes when other people try to impose on you and how you should emote. But that's why, whether your anger is justified or appropriate for the situation, is an assessment that you have to make. And sure, anger is the type of blinding emotion where your amygdala is hijacked, where maybe in the moment you cannot even actually check yourself. And obviously, many of us say and do things in anger that we come to regret later. And the people in our lives who we have this effect on are also justified in speaking up for themselves, because your overt emotions become a problem for them. Which is why, even if you can only manage to do this in reflection, in the aftermath, it still is on you to curtail your behavior and bring it closer to what is appropriate when the situation happens again. You gotta do this work. What we all need to become aware of, though, including you and all the people in your life, is that anger is not necessarily a bad thing. When a child behaves a certain way, because they are a child, and because they can do minimal damage, you have it in you in those moments to give them the benefit of the doubt and look for the meaning in their behavior instead of just labeling them and writing them off. The reality is, though, that many of us in many ways are still childlike. And not even that we haven't matured, but the places our anger is rooted from, the place where it hurts, that comes out in our anger, is just as vulnerable and soft as that of a child. And that's not to justify or to let me or anyone who is angry off the hook. But if you are going to have a relationship with us, then it would help to expand your own understanding of where this emotion is coming from. The sad part about being a man is that even as early as 4 years old, we are told by everyone around us what is an appropriate response to a situation or not. You wouldn't be surprised then when a child becomes a man that he has already learned from the world that it's not okay to cry, not okay to be sad, not to wallow in his emotions, or he'll be called a girl. What he has learned from most of the world is that his worth is derived by what he can do for people, what he can be for them. We are treated like a commodity for others. And for most of us, the only acceptable emotion that we are allowed to emote that is considered to be manly enough is anger. So in my anger, there is hurt. In my anger, there is sadness. In my anger, there is fear. There is dedication. There is love. There is grief. It becomes an all-encompassing emotion, an umbrella, because through my life, I have learned it's the only emotion that is acceptable without it questioning my manhood. And even that is not fully accepted because of how inconvenient it becomes for other people. So what we end up doing is repressing even the umbrella of emotion that the anger encompasses. And then, is it a surprise that we have a mental health crisis for men? Why so many of us end up feeling alone, feeling unaccepted, and suffer in silence, and take our own lives, because no version of us is palatable to the world around us. Repression of any emotion is like a game of whack-a-mole. It's not like we can live a healthy, connected, and fulfilled life while having to repress any of our emotions. And I'm not saying bottling up all of your emotions or any emotion and only emoting it through an outburst of anger is healthy either. But if it isn't for the people in our life that can hold space for our sadness, then we as men need at least some outlet, a brotherhood, a community in which we can be allowed to feel the full spectrum of the wheel of emotions, or even to become aware of what we are feeling in the first place. If you cannot find an outlet for yourself in which you can explore your inner world, then you will find it very difficult to be integrated into the relationships that you must upkeep. There will always remain a slight distance, a slight, they don't know me, they don't see me, I am judged, I am ostracized for who I am, and everything will suffer. Because you will also feel the push and pull from those relationships, and you will be left blaming yourself. There's a writer on Instagram, Xavier, who I read a quote from and watched a clip from his podcast that talked about this. He wrote, "You repress your anger to be nice, but you will have to reclaim it so that you can be kind. Niceness rooted in anger is not true virtue. And reclaiming the validity of anger can be violent. Your body will resist. You will believe yourself that it will hurt people because you may have seen yourself, may have seen versions of your father where anger and rage has done a lot of damage to you, to your mother, to your siblings, to the people you care about. And your body will not just simply accept seeing the same version in yourself. It will say no. In his podcast with another person, Dan, who works with repression of emotions, mentions how in his attempt to separate the repression of anger from the damaging rage, he had to first allow himself to say things that allow him to be violent and actually feel the emotions that come up in his body, to dive deep into the deep-seated fear that it comes from. On my own show, episode 251, I talked about how oftentimes rage is sadness turned inwards. It's depression turned inwards. And to approach and heal those wounds, we must allow ourselves to approach and then embody the rage that is masking it. This is the work we must do. It is hard, slow, and begrudging work, but nothing is slower than the true birth of a man. And to really live, you have to allow every part of you to be born, nurtured, and raised in the right direction. Repressing it leaves many parts of you infantile, unguided, aimless, purposeless, and led astray. To all of my brothers and my sisters who are in their lives, I want you to take an active part in this often brutal work. But there is a silver lining. If you get angrier today, if you wake up and say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not gonna take this anymore. I'm a human being, goddammit. If you muster up the courage to do this, to confront your bloodthirsty rage that will emerge regardless, like all things repressed, the activation force of a spring is only stored until the time you cannot hold it anymore. But if you do this work, you will come out being more human, more loving, more kind, softer than you have ever been. And so when your anger presents itself again, it will be when something is worth getting angry about. And then get angry. Matter of fact, get angrier. I love you, family. Stay true always. See you on the next show.